We begin my top 36 remaining wide receiver rankings. Please remember that players who played on Thursday night or if they're on bye are not included in these rankings. So if you notice somebody missing from this list and they fit under that criteria, that's why. We begin with wide receivers that I think are probably high-end wide receiver threes to potentially low-end wide receiver threes. We have Michael Pittman, Xavier Legette, Quentin Johnston, Jordan Addison, Wandale Robinson, Demario Douglas, DJ Moore, Debo Samuel, Jacoby Myers, and Christian Watson. Michael Pittman Jr. has scored less than 10 fantasy points in every single game since week 6. I do expect that to continue, but I think against Detroit, he should still see a solid amount of volume because they should have to throw the ball quite a bit to stay in this game. And so I think that he's a low-end wide receiver 3, and I really think that Josh Downs is the preferred play among the Colts wide receivers. Xavier Legette is playing against Kansas City, so it is a tough matchup. They allowed the 11th fewest points to wide receivers. I do think, though, that in a game script in which they should have to throw the ball basically the entirety of the game, that he is going to see a solid amount of target volume, and I do expect him to get a couple grabs. I don't, however, expect a touchdown, although to be fair to him, he has been a relatively good touchdown scorer when you consider his limited volume. Quentin Johnston is playing against Baltimore. It is the best matchup that you can draw for wide receiver production. I do think that Ladd McConkey is going to have a much better game, and I expect the same from Will Dissly, but I do think that QJ gets a couple chunk gains. I'm just not calling a touchdown in this one. Jordan Addison is playing against Chicago this week. He has had 5 or more targets in each of the past 3 games, and he's also scored a touchdown in 2 of the past 3 games. I don't think he scores a touchdown, but I think he sees enough volume to be a solid wide receiver 3 this week. Wandale Robinson is playing against Tampa Bay this week. He is coming off an 8-target game. I think he's going to be a consistent short area option for Tommy DeVito. I just don't expect a touchdown in this game, and I think that he's just going to be a solid wide receiver 3. Demario Douglas is playing against Miami this week. They allowed the 3rd fewest points to fantasy wide receivers. However, he's had at least 5 targets in each of the past 3 weeks, and he scored at least 9 fantasy points in a full PPR setting in each of the past 3 weeks. And so I do think that continues, but I don't project a touchdown. I still think, though, that he is the preferred play at wide receiver for the Patriots. DJ Moore has seen at least 6 targets in each of the past 3 weeks. It is a plus matchup against Minnesota. I do think they're going to give Caleb Williams some trouble, and so I do think that he's going to get quite a few short area targets, but I don't think he's going to have a massive day overall. But I still think that he's a safe floor option due to the fact that they are probably going to have to throw quite a bit to stay in this game. And without Shane Waldron there to hinder everybody, I think that raises everybody's floor. It's just, what is the ceiling really for the Chicago wide receivers? I do like Rome a little bit more than DJ this week, but I still think that DJ Moore is a pretty safe floor option as a wide receiver 3. Debo Samuel is playing against Green Bay this week. Not only is it a tough matchup, but they're going to be without Brock Purdy. Allen starting at quarterback for them, it's really tough to know what to expect. But considering it is a tough matchup with a backup quarterback, he is a high upside option because we all know that he is a running back after the catch. But I would really want to be safe this week, and I'm projecting him as a wide receiver 3. Jacoby Myers has received at least 6 targets in every single game since week 2. I expect him to see consistent volume in this game against Denver, but I do think he sees some Pat Surtain. And so for that reason, I would be really conservative with our expectations of Jacoby Myers. But I think due to sheer projected volume alone that he is a safe option as a wide receiver 3. Christian Watson is coming off a 150-yard game. However, it was only on 4 targets, but he still did out-target Romeo Doubs. It is a little bit tough to project as to who the wide receiver of choice is for Green Bay. I think that Jayden Reed is going to be my preferred option and Christian Watson the second option, but it's really tough to know, and so it could be Romeo Doubs or Watson, but I'm projecting that it's Christian Watson this week, and so I think he sees a couple of deep targets and gets a couple chunk gains, but I would really be hesitant having him anything more than a wide receiver 3. Now we have wide receivers that I think are probably mid wide receiver 2s to potentially low end wide receiver 2s, in that general range at least. We have Tank Dell, Jawan Jennings, Xavier Worthy, Calvin Ridley, Rome Odunze, DeAndre Hopkins, JSN, Jayden Reed, Jamison Williams, Cortland Sutton, and Ladd McConkey. So Tank Dell had 7 targets in the return of Nico Collins. Now, Tennessee's pass defense is one of the best at preventing wide receiver production, but L'Jarius Sneed, who's been out for a couple weeks now, was placed on IR. And so I think that's going to make them have to really focus a lot of defensive attention to Nico Collins, which is going to open up things for Tank Dell. I don't project a touchdown, but I think he's going to have a solid volume day overall. Now we have Juwan Jennings against Green Bay. So he has had 11 targets in each of the past 2 weeks. However, those were Brock Purdy targets. With Allen starting at quarterback for them, I really just think that lowers the floor and ceiling, but I do think that Juwan Jennings is going to lead the team in targets this week. Next, we have Xavier Worthy against Carolina. So he should have had quite a few much more massive performances this season. The problem is 5 targets is the most amount of volume he's had in the past 3 weeks. And so even in a plus matchup here against Carolina, it is pretty tough to expect much more than a couple chunk gains. I do think he scores a touchdown, but I just think that the total amount of receptions and yardage is going to be somewhat limited this week. So Calvin Ridley's 6 targets were the fewest in which he's seen since week 3. I expect him to receive more volume than that. Now, while it is a plus matchup against Houston, I do think that the pass rush of Houston is going to be very, very scary. We do expect Will Anderson to play this week, and so I really think that's going to give their offensive line a ton of problems, and it's going to limit his total output. But I still think that he's a solid low-end wide receiver 2 this week. Now we have Rome Odunze against Minnesota. I think the same thing is going to happen to Rome Odunze and the Packers wide receivers really is what I expect to happen to Calvin Ridley, where I think that the front of Minnesota and the aggression they show on defense is going to give Caleb Williams some issues. But I was saying before the season that I really thought that Rome Odunze was going to establish himself as a 1A, 1B type of player where every other game in general, he's going to be the wide receiver 1. He is that talented. He is their best wide receiver, at least in my opinion. And I do think he's going to lead the team in targets this week. It's just, I think he sees a couple chunk gains, no touchdown. And I just think the ceiling is limited, but I think the floor is solid because of the immense volume that I project him to get. Next, we have DeAndre Hopkins. After his 28-point performance 3 weeks ago, he hasn't scored 10 in the past 2 games. I do think he scores a touchdown in this game. I just don't think he sees a massive amount of volume, and I really think that they're going to salt the ball away with Kareem Hunt quite a bit, especially in the second half. And so I think he does his damage early and isn't really going to have a big day when he could, just because it's not really going to be necessary. JSN has established himself as a weekly must-start. He's had 11 and 13 targets in each of the past 2 weeks. I do think that DK Metcalf has the better day, but I really like the floor and potential ceiling for JSN. And I think that if he is able to have around 10 targets per game, he could establish himself as an Amon-Ra St. Brown type of player. Now we have Jaden Reed against San Fran. So he's had 6 or fewer targets in each week since week 4. I expect that to be relatively the same. I think he sees a couple chunk gains against San Fran because I do think that even with that, without Brock Purdy playing, they are going to have to throw the ball quite a bit to, especially if they want to win this game against San Fran. And so I think he's the best option among the wide receiver core, but it is really tough to project on a week-to-week basis as to who is going to receive the passing volume. Now we have Jameson Williams against Indianapolis. It's a great matchup for him, and I think he scores a long touchdown in this game. It's just that with him receiving 5 and 6 targets in each of the past 2 weeks, the volume is there for him to have a couple of big plays, but we just aren't seeing the 11 target production that we saw from him earlier this year. Courtland Sutton has seen at least 8 targets and had at least 10 fantasy points in each of the past 4 weeks. I think that continues against Las Vegas, although it is a tough matchup for him. I think that Bo Nix is going to have a pretty solid day, and I think that Courtland Sutton is a must-start wide receiver 2 this week. Now we have Ladd McConkey against Baltimore. It's a great matchup. I think he sees quite a bit of volume. I'm not projecting a touchdown, though, but I think he's going to establish himself as a very safe wide receiver 2 for us with wide receiver 1 spike weeks. If you like what you're seeing and hearing so far, feel free to like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the channel, and I'd really appreciate it. And make sure you check out my running back, tight end, and quarterback rankings as well, and give me a follow on X. I'm going to leave that below in the description. Thanks. Now we have wide receivers that I think are probably high-end wide receiver 2s to low-end wide receiver 1s. We have Josh Downs, Mike Evans, MHJ, Zay Flowers, and DK Metcalf. So Josh Downs has had at least 5 targets in each of the past 4 weeks and had at least 12 fantasy points in a full PPR setting. I think that continues against Detroit. I do think Detroit's going to give Anthony Richardson some real problems, but I think that Josh Downs is the preferred option among the Colts wide receivers. And I think he's going to be the short area target for Anthony Richardson. And I think he's going to put up a solid PPR performance, but I'm not projecting a touchdown. Mike Evans is playing against the Giants. He has stated that his absolute goal is to have another 1,000-yard season. I think he's going to help himself out here. I'm projecting 5 for 104 and no touchdown for him. If he does happen to score a touchdown, though, I think he's going to be a solid mid to elite wide receiver one. Now we have Marvin Harrison Jr. against Seattle. I don't think he scores a touchdown, but I do think he sees some increased involvement post-bye. In general, rookie wide receivers see an uptick in total volume and production post-bye. And so I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to have some more upside in the coming weeks than we at least saw consistently from him pre-bye. Now we have Zay Flowers against the Chargers. I think he's going to see quite a bit of volume in the short area of the field. I'm not projecting a touchdown, but I think he has a solid day from a full PPR perspective. Now we have DK Metcalf against Arizona. I do think he scores a touchdown, and I think he's a solid option as a low-end wide receiver one this week. Now we have wide receivers that I think are going to be mid to low-end wide receiver ones, but I don't think are likely candidates to be the wide receiver one this week. We have CeeDee Lamb, Malik Neighbors, and Cooper Kupp. CeeDee Lamb is playing against Washington this week after a very unimpressive performance in terms of his output 2 weeks ago. He was solid this past week. Washington does allow a lot of wide receiver production, and so I think CeeDee Lamb is going to be force-fed targets, and due to that, I think he's going to be a solid option as a low-end wide receiver one this week. Now we have Malik Neighbors against Tampa Bay. He is dealing with a groin injury. He said he's going to try to play through it. They're coming out of the bye with a new quarterback. I think he's going to look Malik Neighbors' way early and often, and I do think that Neighbors scores a touchdown this week. And now we have Cooper Kupp against Philly. It's a really, really tough matchup, but I do think that he and Puka Nacua are basically matchup proof with as long as Matt Stafford and Sean McVay are there. And so I think he sees quite a bit of volume, and I do think he scores a touchdown. Now we have wide receivers that I think are going to be mid to elite wide receiver ones. We have Tyreek Hill, Terry McLaurin, JJettas, Nico, Puka, AJ Brown, and Amon-Ra. Tyreek Hill has had at least 10 fantasy points in each of the past 4 weeks, including a touchdown in the past 2. I think that happens once again against New England. Christian Gonzalez is questionable to play, but even with him playing, I still love Tyreek Hill as a mid wide receiver one this week. Now we have Terry McLaurin against Dallas. Fun fact, before this past week in which he only had 2 full PPR points, he had scored at least 10 in each and every single week since week 2. I expect that to happen again. I think he's going to score a touchdown in this game, and I think he's going to be a top 10 option. Justin Jefferson is playing against Chicago this week. It is a really tough matchup. I do think he scores a touchdown, though, and I still think he's an elite wide receiver one. Despite the past 2 weeks, him not having, the standard 20-point performance that we generally expect to see from him. Now we have Nico Collins against Tennessee. Like I said earlier with Tank Dell, I do like the fact that they put L'Jarius Sneed on IR. He had already missed a couple games previously, but it is a good sign for Nico. I still think he sees some extra defensive attention, but I don't think that extra defensive attention is going to stop him from having a 20-point game. He had, a 75, 80-yard touchdown taken off the board this past week in his return, while also only playing 47% of the snaps. I think he's going to be an elite wide receiver one for the rest of the season. Now we have Puka Nacua against Philly. They do allow the 4th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, but he's also scored at least 18 full PPR points in every single game since he returned from the injury, besides when he was ejected for punching another player. And so I think that he is going to have over 18 full PPR points again. I don't expect a touchdown, but I think he has a massive day in terms of total volume, receptions, and yardage. Now we have AJ Brown against the Rams. I think in the absence of Devontae Smith, he is going to have a massive week this week. Against the Rams, they should have to throw quite a bit in order to win this game. Both teams should. And so I love the skill position players across the board for both teams. And finally, we have Amon-Ra St. Brown against Indianapolis. He is coming off a week in which he had over 38 full PPR points and was the wide receiver one. I do project him to be the wide receiver one again, but I don't project 38 points. I do think he scores a touchdown, though, and has a massive day against the Colts, who I don't think stand remotely a chance of stopping him. And so to conclude with the wide receiver tiers, wide receivers that I think are probably high-end to low-end wide receiver threes this week, we have Pittman, Leggett, Johnston, Addison, Wan'Dale Robinson, Douglas, Moore, Deebo Samuel, Jacoby Myers, and Christian Watson. Wide receivers that I think are probably mid wide receiver twos to potentially low-end wide receiver twos, high-end wide receiver threes. We have Tank Dell, Jawan Jennings, Xavier Worthy, Calvin Ridley, Rome Odunze, DeAndre Hopkins, JSN, Jaden Reed, JMO, Cortland Sutton, and Lad McConkey. Wide receivers that I think are probably low-end wide receiver 1s to high-end wide receiver 2s. We have Josh Downs, Mike Evans, MHJ, Zay Flowers, and DK Metcalf. Wide receivers that I think are probably in that mid to low-end wide receiver 1 range, but I don't think are realistic candidates or likely candidates to be the wide receiver 1 this week. We have CeeDee Lamb, Malik Neighbors, and Cooper Kupp. And then wide receivers that I think are probably mid to elite wide receiver 1s with a realistic shot and are more likely to be the wide receiver 1 this week. We have Tyreek Hill, Terry McLaurin, JJettas, Nico Collins, Puka Nacua, AJ Brown, and ASRB. All right, you know the drill. Who do I have too high? Who do I have too low? Is there somebody that I'm missing from this list entirely and I'm not projecting for enough fantasy points? If so, let me know below in the comment section and let me know why. One wide receiver that I think could have a massive game, but I'm projecting not to at this current moment in time, is Darius Slayton of the Giants. If Neighbors does miss this game, I think he is going to slot in directly into his role and have a pretty solid day overall. But once again, if you like what you've seen and heard, feel free to like and subscribe. It's a free and easy way to support the channel, and I'd really appreciate it. And make sure you check out my running back, tight end, and quarterback rankings as well. Thanks.